and speak fairly loudly and.
Where's everyone else? You're right here by
We were
us.
asking the same
Right
questions.
here.
So
I'm just late to everything today. I'm sorry. How are you, Mark?
And Jeannie's here too.
There's Jeannie.
Yep.
You're sliding over, huh? Are we missing? Oh, we're missing 80.
And
That's why.
yeah,
She's got that.
and I didn't realize why you first got that until later someone explained to me. I had no clue.
No, what I
Is Ernesto coming?
Ernesto's coming, yes. But he's a little bit late. So we're gonna get started.
Yeah, up until that it's like, I mean, it was a good
It
thing.
was the best laugh we've gotten.
I looked at my wife and I was like, I can't.
Okay,
I know I'm slow.
we're gonna call our meeting to order. We have one council member still coming. Hopefully everybody else will be here as well too. And welcome, everyone is here. Hopefully we have members from our Light and Power Advisory Board and also from our Renewable Energy and Sustainability Advisory Board, so we can meet together. I think it's great that we were able to get everyone together and do this one time. That's our goal. So doing it 15 times, we'll try and do it one time. So since there are not very many of us here, I'm going to make everyone a little bit uncomfortable and have you introduce yourself so we know who you all are. Oh, I'm so glad you could join us, Ernesto.
I was late too. It's okay.
I know, everybody was late, so it's all right.
It's an off week.
So, I'm Mark Anderson. I'm on City Council, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Council this year. And we're sorry that Amy couldn't be here, but Amy is hopefully joining us remotely. And I also own Anderson Seed and Garden here in Logan, so local businessman as well too. Let's go this way.
I'm Mike Johnson. I'm also on the Logan City Council.
I'm Mayor Danes.
Coming back this way, Ernesto.
Ernest Lopez
Yeah,
on City Council.
Jeannie Simmons, City Council.
Okay, Tyson Godfrey, I'm the chair of the Renewable Energy and Sustainability Advisory Board.
Would you like to join us up here since you are the chair? We'll just have the chair join us up here. All right. Yeah, yeah. If you're, yeah. Who else is chair of the RESAP board?
My stuff out of the way.
I'm Nathaniel Weidler. I'm the vice chair of the Logan City Power Board.
Yes, which would make you the chair today. Come join us up here.
Yeah, there you go.
Please come join us. Yeah, the more the merrier. We'll make them more uncomfortable out there. So, Mark, please go ahead.
Mark Montgomery, I'm the department head for the power department.
Wonderful. And Anuj?
Anuj Patel, Siemens PTI.
Wonderful. And Giselle?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm Giselle Lerman from the Siemens PTI.
Wonderful.
Which is our Logan Light and Power Resource
Sensational.
Manager.
Butchie, you can move to the front row.
Yeah, you can come. Yeah, you can come up here.
She likes it right where she
I
is.
can hear us very
Well, and thank you all for making the uncomfortable introductions, but I think that's great. We can know who everyone is, and thank you all for being here. Mark, do you have our presentation, or?
I will turn the time over to Anuj and Gazal.
Wonderful. We look forward to your presentation.
I can flip for you.
Yeah.
So I'm Giselle Lerman from Siemens PTI, so I'm the project manager of this integrated research plan study. So today we would like to present the project scope and our objectives and the inputs that we use for this whole study and the outcomes and the key findings as a result of this engagement. So we can start with the project scope.
Okay.
So the objective of this IRP engagement is to support Logan's light and power, which I will do for as a Logan speak during my presentation, in the assessing of different resource portfolio options and to support them selection in the preferred portfolio, which helps them to achieve their environmental roadmap goal and also support them to provide energy for the future. So in the scope, we reviewed the Logan's these existing generation fleet with all technical aspects and also all the cost components. We analyzed the different resource strategies, resource supply strategies, and we also assessed all these portfolios in terms of the reliability under the different market conditions. We provide the balance scorecard, which includes the comparison of each portfolios depending on the objectives and metrics we set together. And at the end, we develop a written IRP report, which includes all approaches, all inputs, and all key findings and our strategic recommendations. So I will tell more about all these steps in the following slides. So as CMOS PTI, we follow the comprehensive approach called the 5-step IRP process. This process is designed to support the Logan City to provide them some strategic roadmap and also support them to identify their preferred portfolio, which helps them to effective transition towards their environmental goals. So as a first step in this process, we clearly define the objectives that guide all these resource planning studies. We work closely with the Logan City and its stakeholders to identify and establish these objectives. As a second step, we identify the metrics for each objectives. So these objectives were broken down into different metrics. These metrics help us to evaluate each portfolio on a quantitative basis, so that way we can calculate the results and we can compare the results on the measurable way. So during these first two steps, we also identified the key risk factors that may affect the resource planning study. So we also include these assumptions on the decision process. Once we identify the objectives and metrics, as a third step, we develop a different set of resource portfolios to analyze during whole analysis. So these portfolios were addressing different strategies and different objectives. So in this step, we also worked on the build plans for each portfolio. And in the fourth step, we analyzed all these portfolios. We tested them under the different input scenarios. We specifically examined the high-load scenario. So I will explain all of these in the following slides. I just want to give you a brief intro about the process we followed. And as a final product, we developed a balanced scorecard, which helps us to understand the weakness and the strengths of each portfolio. And it helped us to compare each portfolio depending on the objectives and metrics we set in the first two steps. So this table shows us the main categories that we considered, the objectives and metrics and the relevant weights for each metric. So we decided on all of these objectives and metrics together with the Logan City. We have three main categories. These are affordability, sustainability, and reliability. In the affordability category, we basically looks at the overall cost of each portfolio. And in that category, we have some metrics. These are the present value of the total cost. We have the capital investment requirement, and we have the market risk minimization. So in this category, with the least cost and which provide a stable financial gets the higher score for that category. And in the sustainability category, this gives us the environmental impact of each portfolio. So in this category, we looked at the emissions amount for each portfolio and the renewable content by 2030 and 35. And in the last category, which is the reliability, we measured the ability of each portfolio to provide a stable and consistent energy during the 20 years. So in this category, we looked at the reserve margin metric, we look at the resource diversity, and we look at the manage the largest contingency metrics, the objectives. And we scored all the portfolios based on this weight, which we provided from the Logan City and its stakeholders. So before going to portfolios, do you have any questions or how?
Did you decide on the 50% for affordability? Or?
Well, we kind of, in conjunction with the renewable board, and I don't remember if the power board had an input or not, but just kind of, all together.
Because I saw affordability is at 50%, everybody else is 20 and 30, so a little heavier weight there.
So,
I'm not complaining about that.
Sure.
well, but
Yeah, I
how
think
does
that'll-
the renewable board, how does that fit into their goals?
Well, again, that may, I mean, maybe we hold that one for the end, but,
Okay.
yeah.
So a lot of the portfolios that she's going to go over are targets towards renewable goals from RESAB. So the scorecard is kind of grading those portfolios that go to meeting those goals.
Okay.
You'll see that in a couple of slides coming up, exactly what Tyson was talking about.
Is the renewable generation by 2030 that 50% goal, and by 2035?
That's one of the portfolios.
Yeah, we have four
There's
different
four
portfolios
scenarios.
with different renewable targets that, yeah.
Just to fast forward, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, we can
So,
start with this one.
Don't give it away. Don't give it away.
I'll go back.
Hold that thought.
Yeah, don't give it away.
Yes.
So, at the beginning of the study, we, as I mentioned, we reviewed the existing generation fleet of Logan City, and we also reviewed some operational considerations. Within the scope, we also added some pending resources that were provided by the Logan City to the study. And also we added 9 megawatts of thermal capacity as a master unit, which are the sun-side waste coal, and also the customer-owned cogeneration. So these are the master resources. This is important because it affects some of the emission-related metrics at the end. So we can talk about more at the end about these monstrons, but these are the important inputs that we use for the study. So we worked on this analysis for 20 years, which starts in 2023. And our purpose was defining the least cost option to meet all the environmental goals, plus by considering the operational constraints and the costs. So within the scope of this engagement, we developed 4 different portfolios. These portfolios were identified based on the Logan City's priorities and their objectives. The first portfolio is the baseline portfolio. This is more like a business as usual scenario. We only applied the 50% renewable target by 2030 in this scenario. So we developed this portfolio to have some benchmarks that we can compare the other portfolios with in terms of the reliability, environmental impact, and cost. And the second portfolio is the reference portfolio. In this portfolio, we assume that 50% of the energy needs comes from the renewable by 2030, and 70% by 2035, and 90% by 2040. This is more in line what we see in the environmental roadmap goal. So this is like a middle ground scenario. The third scenario is candidate portfolio 1, which has the more aggressive renewable targets. We assumed that 75% renewable target by 2030 and 100% by 2035. The reason that we developed that portfolio to see the impact of accelerating the renewable integration, how the reliability will affect with that change, and how the cost will look like at the end of the additions, more renewables and storage units. And the last portfolio is candidate portfolio 2, which has the same renewable goals as the reference case, but we applied a 10% market purchase limit on that scenario to see what is the impact of limitation the market purchases and how the generation fleet will look like with these kind of constraints, and how the storage and other more reliable, more firm capacity resources behaves under this kind of situation. These are the portfolio that we will discuss in the following slides. So in this slide, we focus on the economic capacity additions in the near term. This number shows us the total economical capacity additions until 2030. So just now note, we had some pending resources too. So we can assume that these numbers are on top of them. So these are just the economical additions. So when we look at the first two portfolios, the baseline and the preference portfolio, we have the same capacity additions, which is 40 megawatt of solar. The reason that we have the same is the environmental target is the same until the 2030, which is the 50%. So when we look at the candidate portfolio 1, we start seeing some wind additions to the system because we have higher targets in that scenario, which is 70%, and we have more solar and wind additions. And when we have that much solar and wind, we start seeing some storage too to manage that generation variation. So that's why we have more storage. And in the last scenario, which is the same renewable target as the first two portfolio, but with the market purchase limit, we see some shifts between the solar and wind additions. So the reason of that is, since we have a limit on the night times, we need more capacity on the night times too. So there is a shift between the solar and wind because of that. And we have less storage because the reason that we have less storage, I was talking about the whole result. So we don't have any storage until 2030. In total, we have 45 megawatts until the 2030 in the last scenario as well. Do we have any questions so far?
Can we flip back real quick to the pending resources? Just, so that's on top of this list of stuff that we don't have yet, but is pending and already planned to be added.
Yeah. Some exist up there and some are coming.
So that list of 4 items is not included in the portfolios, but
It is, but the next slide that we were just on, these things are not shown on that slide. That slide
That's
shows additional above and beyond this.
above and beyond this piece.
And if I can add, we use the word economical. That doesn't mean that these aren't economic. It's just that these are already more advanced in terms of planning. So the Logan City has already kind of done that already. So we've incorporated that even though they're not built. The other ones that you see there that Gazal pointed out is just what additional things do you need on top of that to be able to meet your requirements for whichever case that we're looking at.
So at minimum, we need another 40 megawatts.
On top of whatever has already been planned by Logan City, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing, if I can add, this slide only shows till 2030. And the reason why we're showing that, because the next slide is going to go through the entire study period, is typically when it comes to utilities, and you think about capital planning process, next 5 years are going to be important. So we need to know what do we need to do in the next 5 years so that Mark and others know how much money do they need, what resource do we need, what do we go out and get. And so that's why this is important, because what it also shows is depending on which portfolio you're looking at, there's probably a no regret decision, right? I mean, you could look at, between the first two, it's very simple, it's the same. But when you look at the second and the third, it shows you're going to need at least 40 megawatts. And if you do more, then you just get more higher renewable. That's a perspective that you guys will need to opine on and say, do we want to do it once we kind of look at the end? So that's why we're showing 2030. And the other reason is things change, right? So there's a lot of assumptions that go into this analysis. If your demand increases drastically from what we've assumed in here, which we would know, let's say if we were to do this 3 years later, or 4 years, whatever it is, right? So now things have changed. How do you adjust this portfolio for the next 5 years? So it is a roadmap, but it's also a living document. You can plan for the next 5 years, start planning for the next following 5 years beyond that, and then as you look at kind of the last 10 years of this forecast, things are likely going to change, right? We're not that good at predicting. And then the other thing is technological costs, right? We've got battery in here. Battery's expensive, but as you read in the papers, there's more and more innovation that's going on, especially with the IRA bill. So when that happens, we're expecting kind of the revolution that we saw in solar, right? If you go back 20 years ago, solar costs were incredibly high, and they've dropped precipitously, So if something similar like that were to happen with batteries, I can see battery becoming a bigger portion of the portfolio. And when we look at it later, at that time we can decide, okay, well, the costs have dropped enough, let's go put more battery. Right now, yeah, it does seem a little bit expensive. So again, it's whatever happens in the next slide is not set in stone. It's just giving you a path of what it looks like if you assume today.
If you go back one slide, maybe forward,
One more?
that one, right there. So I see natural gas peaker, are these considered renewable? Because,
No.
okay.
If it's burning fossil fuel, it's not renewable.
Okay, I was confused by that one.
Yep. Yeah.
Mark, what's our average consumption right now? 100-ish, is that
Well,
correct?
that's our peak.
Peak, okay.
We probably, our baseline consumption's 60.
It's ranging wintertime or shoulder month about 65 to, like in wintertime, it could be go to 70 to 72 in January, December, January. And then in March, in May, April, and May, probably 65.
Okay.
But in summer, in July and August could be over 100. This year's peak is 102. Right?
102.9.
So
Almost 100.
75 to 100, give or take. We're looking at adding, if I'm doing rough math correctly, another 70 to 75 megawatts. That's already planned, is that correct?
That's on
That's on this
here.
slide, yes.
Yeah, ish.
Yeah, these things are changing as we speak right now. The natural gas peaker, we already signed up for studies 25 megawatt, and the base load natural gas, which is not showing here, is another 30 megawatt. So these are, what they provide is a roadmap. Is, we outlook for 5 years from now. But our situation is constantly changing. We couldn't push them to keep on changing or whatever we provided. This one was provided probably December 2023 when the project started. But now, half a year later, our situation has changed. But this is based on what we provide them then.
For example, of that 30 megawatts of solar, since then we're using a little over 10 megawatts now that's come online. We've also signed up for a little bit of wind that was not on this project. You know what I mean? It's
Sure.
It's such a moving target.
So this isn't in addition to what we're using now. This is
These
what we're
are
looking to
things that
use.
are coming on now.
Okay.
Keep in mind that we do have resources that will be retiring in the next.
Okay. So it's not 75-ish now, adding 75 in the
No,
next
no.
6 years. Okay.
And it's also the timing of it where,
I'd have to look at what the net would be.
Okay.
yeah, where not all of those are generating at the same time. So it's not adding, so you have a huge peak.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the key thing. I think back in the day when we didn't have renewables and it's more firm assets with fossil fuel, if you say you're building a 30 megawatt natural gas, CCGT or whatever, it's there 24/7, sure, right? In this case, solar, you've got it for what, 10 hours best, right? And then it disappears. So you can't really add it because at nighttime when that demand's higher, that 30 is not existing.
Thank you.
Yep. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
Yes, thank you so much.
And I just wanted to make a distinction in the question. So natural gas is certainly not renewable, but some consider it clean, and there's things that you can do to help it be more clean than others.
Right.
So just, because I think we care about both, right?
Yeah. And that'll go into the total emission numbers. Where
Right, yeah.
Compared, yeah.
Yeah, so like I said natural gas, but like if you have biogas coming from a waste plant,
Right.
it's got carbon in it,
Right.
but they actually consider that renewable.
Yeah.
So, but there isn't that much of it around, right? So, yeah, it could be renewable, but in this particular case, we're just talking straight natural gas, and in that case, it's not.
Right.
Next slide.
So this graph represents the total capacity additions through the whole planning horizon. For the baseline, the total additions is 55 megawatts. We don't have much additions after 2030 because we have only target for the 2030 by 50%. So that's why we have only 55 megawatt additions. In the reference portfolio, with the increase in the renewable targets over the years, we start seeing some wind additions too, and also storage additions. And in total, we see the 205 megawatt capacity additions, which has the 100 megawatt from the solar, 45 megawatt from the wind, and 60 megawatt from the storage. And in the third portfolio, which is the candidate portfolio one, we have the highest capacity additions, of course, in this scenario, because we are achieving to reach 100% by the 2035 in this scenario, so that's why we have 245 megawatt additions. And the last portfolio, which is the candidate portfolio 2 with the market purchase limit, we have 175 megawatt additions. So basically, it has the same renewable targets as the reference portfolio, but the main difference is the market purchase limit. So it affects the storage additions because there are two ways that you can charge your storage, which are your solar. You can use your excessive solar to charge your storage, or you can charge your storage through the market imports. So when you limit the market purchases, it also affects the charging ability of the storage units. That's why we have the less storage additions in that scenario. So this graph shows us the net present value of the total cost for each portfolio. The black and bold numbers represent the total costs, and we have the breakdown of the costs in the below. So the total market sales represent the total revenues from the market sales, and total variable O&M costs represent the fuel cost for the thermal units and the variable O&M costs. And total fixed costs represent the capex for the new technologies, new additions, and plus fixed O&M costs for the existing generation sources. And the last cost component is the total market purchases. This represents your cost for your spot market purchases. So when you look at the numbers, the most expensive portfolio is, of course, candidate portfolio 1. Because of the high fixed cost requirement, the capital investment requirement, we have 245 megawatt additions in that scenario, which requires a lot of capital. But in the opposite side, we have the least cost in the variable O&M cost, because with the renewable additions, we utilize the thermal units less, which reduce the fuel cost, so that's why we have the less total variable O&M cost in that scenario. And when we look at the baseline portfolio, which is this cost option, which is driven by the capacity additions, basically. But when we look at the market purchases, that scenario exposed the market so much compared to other scenarios. So, and also it has the relatively high variable O&M cost. So there's that shift between the total variable O&M cost and market purchases and the fixed costs. When we look at the reference portfolio and candidate portfolio 2, they are more balanced compared to other two portfolios. The reference portfolio has the fixed the capital investment requirement and fixed cost, of course, but it has less variable O&M cost compared to candidate portfolio 2. The reason that we see the high costs in the variable O&M costs in the last portfolio, which is candidate portfolio 2, is when we limit the market purchases, we started utilizing more thermal units, which increase the overall fuel cost for that portfolio, and also it increases emission amounts too. We will see that results in the next slide.
Sorry, a couple of questions.
Sure.
One, this lost me when I first started in this industry. Does everybody know what O&M means?
Mm-hmm. Operation and maintenance.
Operation and maintenance, okay. And then my second question is, on the market sales, shouldn't that decrement off the total?
Yeah, it is, by the way. Yeah, we didn't put the negative sign, but when we calculate the total cost, we reduce that remaining from the total cost.
Okay, so that's showing the dashed line is where it came down to.
Yes.
And that total is 355 on the portfolio. Okay. That wasn't.
So the 355 is actually where the blue is, right?
Right.
I think so. Yeah, or it would have been 365.
Yeah, without the market
Yeah.
sales.
So there's not, when you're talking about $300 million, there's not a lot of difference between those four scenarios.
$40 million difference.
Well, but
It's still a lot of money.
when you're talking about
only
200,
It's less than
To your
10%.
point,
Yeah.
Jeannie, when I think I gotta come up with $100 million more dollars for the next
Yeah.
But,
I don't want to say $40 million, that's nothing.
But between 100% renewable and the other one, we're only up like 25 million. It's
The
less
key
than,
thing
it's
is,
less than 10%.
this is the total
Yeah.
portfolio cost. So if you think about, for Mark to operate the entire system to give you the power that you need, the overall bill in real dollars is what we're showing here is 330. So for 20 years of service that Mark provides, it's going to cost you 300 million. You can look at it that way.
and that's,
And that's over 20 years. Yeah, this is 20 years worth of service that he's providing.
Get on that
And the
one.
cost.
but
And that's in today's dollars.
if you go,
That's in today's dollars.
if you
Yeah.
figure the cost per megawatt generated, that's, I mean, if you go back, it's
That's,
not.
yeah, I'd say go back one slide, because I want to see how many, megawatts we're talking about, so, yeah. so-
Well, except for this is additional generation that they're proposing above our first
It's
list.
not the total.
The next list is the net present value for the total.
Yeah. So if you
The net
zoom in-
present value of the total cost of operations for the next 20 years?
Yeah,
Is that what
including
you're
your
saying?
fossil
Yeah.
fuel
Yeah.
units and your
Yeah.
market
So,
purchases.
so for example, council just passed a budget for the light and power department for this fiscal year for 40 million-ish. So that 40 million is part of that 300 million, right, over the next 20 years.
Yeah, the only thing that these costs aren't including is your transformers and local,
Well, hopefully that's rolled into the O&M.
is that in the O&M?
Yeah, we have one.
Wages,
Operating basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're saying you only need 30 million for
No, no.
the next 10 years, right?
Exactly, I was
The
thinking.
other thing that I want to point out
I was like, are you 40 million for a year? What are you doing?
I'm spending way too much on my.
I'll defend Mark a little bit. So this,
Can we adjust
when we do these studies, we do it in real time. Because we don't know what the inflation is going to be, right? We don't really know what it was. We didn't think it was going to be what it was the last few years. So we do, all these studies are done in real term. And then, so that way at least it's a roadmap. It can tell you what we need to do. And then when it comes to actuals, yeah, you can throw in the
I
actual
think we should
inflation.
all have been doing it in $80s dollars.
It's so much easier, yeah.
Because the inflation was super high. And we could just, project
Yeah,
it
but we
that
had
way.
good music.
Yeah, right.
What?
But we had good music.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So the other thing I was going to point out is, with all this renewable capacity that we're adding, when you look at the NPV, the part about the total fixed cost, I think that's the other thing that Gazelle was mentioning, the fact that you have $286 million in that third column, right, is because you're paying for whatever we said, right, the 245 megawatts. So that's where it shows up, and I think this is what you were talking about, that line item shows that. Plus there's other fixed costs too that are rolled in there that we talked about.
But this is the cost to operate for the next, that's a
20
total
years.
cost for 20 years.
In $2023.
In 2023 dollars.
In $2023.
So it'll be.
But if we projected your current budget, I don't get how we've got to purchase a lot, we've got to create a lot of capacity, but it's going to actually cost us less.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading.
I'm not saying it either, but whatever.
Because it would
20
be,
years, yeah. Divide that by 20, it's like, you only need a budget of 15 million.
Well, I mean, if you project,
Done. I'll sign that
if
right
you
now.
project that $308 million over 20 years and put an inflation component of 4%, that's going to look a lot bigger.
it's still not going to look like 20 years of $40 million.
But these are also projections, and they're only as good as the data. So we sign up for projects, and we get $30 a megawatt hour for a wind project, and then 3 years into it, we're like, oh well, that's actually costing $70 a megawatt hour, and you're into it. So I mean, so I don't know if we can really compare. We can say, well, this is our actual budget, right? This is just the projection. We just have to use it as it is.
Okay, I'm fine, I'm just like.
But why is the projection so much lower
So
than this year's
maybe
budget?
that's a question I could ask Anuj and Gazal is, on the net present value to run this thing, is that just, we'll just take one plant, like my natural gas plant down in Payson. this is taking into account O&M costs, fixed costs, all that. But
Just
does that take
transmission
into account that I spent $1.2 million to dredge sediment out of Second Dam?
No.
You know what I mean?
It would not cover those kind of
ancillary
things.
costs that.
And
Yeah.
I don't think this would have
It would not
covered the
cover.
cost of
It wouldn't have
purchasing the
covered.
natural gas generator initially, right? Like, you're not including operating or fixed costs that have already been spent
No.
by the city. This is
Correct,
only
yeah.
additional.
I think the kind of stuff that Mark is talking about, you can't really plan for that. I'm sure, like, we didn't know we were gonna have.
So those
to-
estimates aren't in the
So those
operating
aren't-
maintenance,
yeah.
okay.
So I think to Mark's point,
So
this is a roadmap.
He's
and
trying
this-
to defend.
No, and
I'm just trying to understand. I'm getting more questions. I thought I understood this until tonight. But
And this doesn't account for the big increase in transmission?
No, that's generation cost.
So
It
that's
does.
a key, that's a
No,
key.
transmission costs are
So
not.
I lied. This doesn't cover
Oh,
Yeah.
this doesn't include
transport
They're not
wire in the
included.
city
No transmission.
and trucks to run.
Yeah,
and-
that's.
Okay.
It's
Only
huge cost that
generation
we
costs.
Well, I know
So if
that.
take-
Yeah, but these don't include transmission.
What? Huh?
It's generation cost.
Yeah, it's just generation.
So
That makes a lot more
So
sense.
the big question is natural
I
gas.
should have said that 3 minutes ago.
This pays the cost to purchase it, to pay the bonds, to pay to well, I don't know if the transmission costs are there, probably not. but
No.
No,
The
transmission.
cost to buy the natural gas, the cost to maintain the equipment, the cost to maintain the plant.
then it might-
Everything outside that is not in these.
But then it might cost us twice, again, twice that much to get it here.
Right.
To use
get it here and for us to take care of it in the city with our linemen and our trucks and our wire and our transformers.
So to clarify, this is not including any of our like repair, upkeep, maintenance within the city. This is only purchasing.
This is your cost of,
Okay.
this is your cost of goods, is what it is, yeah.
Yeah, but
That's
if
the
it's
term I'm looking
O&M, that.
No, I think that some O&M costs are rolled in here,
Yeah,
so I would
as a-
say.
as a
it's
business, I'm
cost.
looking and say, okay, my product that I'm selling costs me 50% of what
Right.
I'm selling it for,
Yeah.
so then I've got, the rest of my budget to work with. So-
I think that's great, there's one
I
that's misunderstood.
misunderstood.
Yeah, yeah.
And the transmission cost, as Mark mentioned to us earlier, has gone up quite a bit, or at least they're proposing to, and that would add to this. So I would look at this more of a strategic exercise to say, okay, given kind of the path that I
And
want
a
to,
comparison.
which one is kind of the lowest cost? Recognizing that the assumption could change in terms of gas prices and things like that, that we might have used in there.
So you're gonna break it down to like this is a cost per megawatts for this. Did you break that down?
They've got it in the report.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like the.
technically, we have the cost for each year, and then we have also what is the overall load for each year. So I suppose we can do that math, and that'd be pretty easy to say, okay, each year, and kind of plot that out, says, okay, this is what your dollars per megawatt hour looks like for that year.
For the
So
generation.
it's, yeah, so we have that data in there, so we can certainly provide that. But the key thing, in Mark's defense, is transmission costs aren't in there, and they're.
Mike had a question as well.
I just want to point out, one of the key parts of this is we're coming out of this period where we're really exposed to the market, and market prices went haywire after COVID. In the baseline portfolio, that's our biggest exposure to the market. So if the market goes haywire for a year or 2 or 3 down the road in an unpredictable fashion, we're more exposed in that and less exposed in the far right.
Yeah.
And how do you allocate the dollar amount to that risk, right? Yeah. You can, but that's sort of a key point in the differences between these, besides just renewability.
While we're a little bit off topic, can I ask another question?
Sure.
So you've got $47 million difference between your baseline and Canada Portfolio 1, which over 20 years is like $2 million, give or take, right? 2.3. What does that actually look like in terms of like if we were looking at 2.25 more million every year in your budget, but that's just for the generation side. I'm assuming it's only a small portion of what it actually costs to provide that power. And I'm not saying we want to do it, but hypothetically we say, okay, we want to go for that 355, that candidate 1, $2.25 million a year in generation costs. Is that a third of our cost, a fifth of our cost? I mean, what are we roughly actually looking at if that was a possibility for us?
It's roughly 5% of our budget, current budget.
But that's just for generation costs, right?
Right.
That doesn't take into account the cost.
Generation is 5% of our budget?
No, I mean,
The difference between 2.5 million.
yes.
Right, it's like
$2.5 million more
baseline.
on the budget.
Right, it's an additional 5% of the budget.
Yeah.
So,
But if we wanted to go 100% renewable, like that's showing, it would only be a 5% increase on your budget. It wouldn't cost more to be renewable outside of that?
Well,
You might have some differences. in
again,
transmission.
there are so many assumptions here. I think the value in this report is just saying, well, if we did this roadmap, it's gonna be this, and this one's gonna be a little bit more here, and this one's gonna be a little bit less here. But as, I think to assign actual dollars to what this is actually gonna cost,
Sure.
you can't do that.
Can't we do
But
Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
think
Because
it's
I
possible.
think where Mike's trying to go is like, well, if it's gonna only cost that much, we just like throw it
I
out
don't ever-
there, throw it out there to our consumers
I don't
and
ever
say,
put
do you
only
want-
by $2
I
million.
know, but it's like you throw it out there to our consumers and say, okay, are you willing to pay an extra 5% to have 100% renewable?
Well, and then that doesn't communicate
Which, yeah,
that the availability of that
5%
renewable
Yeah,
power
it's
is just
like
not there.
gas.
Am I correct to say that, or
I'm sorry, say that again.
that the availability of the extra power to be completely renewable is just not available right now?
Yes and no. I mean, well, so we're presented with projects all the time through UMs and even just as a city, but some of them, the costs are just, there's no way we could really do that without doing major rate increases for people to afford. So yes, we could get it, but if our metric is 50%, we got to keep it affordable, then you're right, it's not there, at least right now, but things are changing and who knows?
And I think another important thing with this is the fixed costs are for estimated costs for Logan City building these generation, not buying it from someone else. So if you're doing a power purchase agreement, that potentially changes.
So
This
I'll
picture.
just throw two things out that could throw these numbers a long ways. One is if you're talking about natural gas generation, on the other part of it, if that gas price jumps or shrinks, that moves our costs a lot. The other thing that on this particular slide that's interesting to think about is on our market sales, we're seeing negative pricing on solar in the middle of the day, which means that if I'm trying to sell solar onto the grid, I have to pay somebody to take it. So those market sales no longer decrement now, they cost me.
but if you had,
So it just depends on what the market does over the
but if battery storage somehow magically became,
cheaper. Right,
Cheaper
so
and-
you've got all these things that are moving. I don't want us to get lost in the weeds. I think the value of this is just to compare these different scenarios and see, using the same cost for everything, how they balance out with each other.
okay.
Yep. And then the budgeting question, I think that's a separate exercise. We have to kind of get into the various assumptions, but like Mark said.
One other thing that we had talked about on this is that this also doesn't show value of fixed resources beyond 2042. So some of the resources we're building will still be usable and
Functional,
operating
yeah.
past 2042, but that's not taking this into account.
Right. Yeah.
So it's, you're paying for the resource in this window, but the resource's useful life goes outside of this window for some of these things.
Right. Right. And these solar assets, they go well beyond 25, 30 years. They do degrade, but they only degrade up to like 80%. So you will have these assets for a longer period of time. Battery, not so much. The battery will, after so many cycles, and they will lose a lot more. But we're hoping for technological innovation there that comes in that you can replace it with.
And batteries over here, right, Mark?
Okay, can I, Amy sent.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Rich Guy has a question. Integrated Resource Plan. Hi, Amy, this is Rich Guy. I'm on the advisory board of Light and Power. I'm watching the presentation from Siemens. I went through their data earlier today. They did a nice job with the resource planning. I have no way of asking a question. Would you be willing to ask a question for me? They mentioned that they were looking at the least cost scenario, least cost, not least, least cost scenario, but all I see is that they did scenario analysis. My question is, did they run an optimization model or just scenario and analysis? Typically, you can't get the least cost with just running scenarios, just curious. There's three components. There's a supply cost, the transmission cost, and the distribution cost. The resource plan only focuses on the supply cost.
That's correct. So we did the resource planning, not the system planning, so we didn't include any distribution of transmission cost in this analysis, but we did optimization. So all these megawatts are based on the, so we basically optimize all the portfolios based on the strategies that we decide, like environmental targets, but we find the optimal portfolio mix, which gives us a least cost option. So that numbers comes from the optimization, that the X megawatts comes from the optimization directly.
So I think the different color could slide around, right? And they've moved to what the least cost scenario is. by
For each scenario, it's the least cost, not
Yes.
what's the least
Right.
cost for any
Or
scenario.
that's
Correct.
scenario.
And to run, just to add a little bit more of these optimization that we're talking about for each of these portfolios are done on a supercomputer. I think they take about a week for each case at least. And then there's a bunch of analysis that goes beyond it to look at, terabyte worth of data to kind of decipher all this stuff that comes out of it. And if there's any issues, then we do it again and make sure we kind of correct it. But that's the amount of optimization and analysis that goes on. And because it's for 20 years, it takes a while.
To belabor a point, if we sign PPAs for all of these, would we have to output any capital costs? Zero? Like, or would our cost be zero and it's all operating costs?
If it's a PPA, then it's just the PPA cost times, whatever, dollars per megawatt times the number of megawatts. So you're buying no O&M, no nothing, because they're maintaining all that. But you'll pay for it.
But
Right.
yeah.
But we'll pay for it over
It's
time,
really
not in front
Right.
of the capital cost like this is showing.
Exactly.
So those are the bookends. So we can put $350 million down now, or we can pay somebody else over time to do it for us.
And keep in mind,
Which is how we do
when we do this analysis, we assume sort of what a reasonable return is, right? I forgot what the number is when we do the modeling in the LCOE, but it might be 10% return or something like that. So that's what you would expect sort of a utility to get. But if you have some PPA folks that come out and they say we want 13 or 15 or whatever, otherwise I'll go to California, then that would be reflected in their price, that could be higher. So
it may be not quite correct to say we're going to spend $340 million in capital. It could be $340 million in monthly bills to some companies. That's the more likely scenario.
Sure.
We probably better let them proceed or we're going to
Yes.
be here for a long time.
It's good that we're getting this in action, I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So in step 4, we also tested all these portfolios under the different market conditions. We used the high-load scenario for that one, which is driven by the higher EV adoption and also higher electric heating demand assumption. So we updated the load forecast based on these two main chains, and at the end of the updates we saw that there's a 16% increase in the net load by 2042 compared to base case, which we can see that change in the left side of the slide. So we also observed that there is a big change after we applied that electrification scenario, which is that the peak load shifted from the summer afternoons to winter mornings in 2035, which directly affects the reliability of the system. So we analyzed all these portfolios under this condition to see if these portfolios performed well with the high load scenario, and if we don't have any unserved energy, if we have that load scenario instead of our base case. So in all portfolios, we did not observe any unserved energy. And we used some of the results from that analysis in the balance chart as well, which we'll present in the next slide.
In other words, we were, in cases of this, for certain portfolios, we had to buy more from the market to be able to meet that. That's why we didn't have any unserved energy.
And this is the balance scorecard. I know it's a bit small, but it has the objectives and metrics and ways that we discussed in the previous slides. So this balance scorecard helps us to compare each portfolio based on the different metrics, and we gave some scores to each metrics and each portfolio depending on the results. So 4 represent the best performing and 1 represent the worst. We have three main categories here. We have affordability. In the affordability, we just talked about that, but the best performing portfolio, of course, baseline portfolio in the first three metrics, because we have less capacity additions, less capital investment requirements, and less net present value of the total costs. But in the opposite, we have the higher market exposure. That's why we have one in the market risk minimization metric. But when we look at the candidate portfolio one, it has the highest cost due to the high amount of renewable additions. So it's performing worse compared to other portfolios. But the reference portfolio performs more balanced compared to these portfolios. So it has some cost, but it's relatively lower compared to candidate portfolio one, and it has still some market risk exposure, but not as much as the baseline portfolio. So it's more balanced. So the second category is the sustainability. In this category, we have the total emission amount metric and renewable content metric. So as expected, the best performing portfolio is the candidate portfolio one in this scenario, because we have lots of solar, wind, and storage units. And the worst one is the baseline portfolio, because we only have the 50% renewable targets. And other important thing is in the candidate portfolio too, it has the highest emissions due to the limitations. So I just mentioned about that, but since we have a market purchase limit, we had to utilize more thermal generation on that portfolio, so that's why we have higher emissions compared to the other ones. And the reason that we see the trees for the first three portfolio emission amounts, normally they have differences in the emissions amounts, but they are minor differences, so that's why we scored them as the same. And the main reason is we have some master resources in the assumptions. So Logan City doesn't have a control on them. So they are not subject to optimization. They have to run as much as they can, and they have some emissions, so we can't eliminate that emissions. So that's why we have some emissions in the DAP 3 portfolios. And the last category is the reliability. We have reserve margin, unserved energy, resource diversity, and managed largest contingency objectives. So it's the same, since we have a more capacity in the candidate portfolio one, and we have the storage capacity is more in that portfolio. We see the highest score in that portfolio compared to other ones. And the baseline portfolio, we see lots of ones. The reason of that is we don't have enough capacity to serve the peak loads for that portfolio. We more exposure to the market purchases instead of utilizing our own generation. So that's why we have ones in the baseline portfolio. But again, the reference portfolio is more balanced in terms of the reliability too. So when we calculate the overall total result, total scores for each portfolio, we multiply these numbers with the weights that I identified at the beginning of the process. And based on the results, the best performing portfolio is the reference portfolio in this case. So we have same slides with the numbers instead of the scores. But this gives us a big differences in terms of the cost between the reference portfolio and the candidate portfolio one.
Can I ask just a really random question? I don't know what terminal generation means.
Thermal generation?
Terminal.
Burning?
Didn't she say terminal?
Thermal.
Oh, okay.
Fossil
Sorry.
fuels.
Okay. I was like, what is that and why does it make emissions? Sorry. Didn't understand. Okay.
So the interesting thing about this is, and maybe Ghazal's going to bring this point up, is if you weight those different metrics differently, right? Say you wanted 99% of your points in reliability and you don't care about the other stuff, then that's going to change this completely. So that's why that trying to figure out how to weight each metric is kind of a big deal. And did we do it right? I don't know.
Those-
That's what we did.
Those numbers are really close.
They are very close.
I mean, you're only 1/10% or 1/10 of a point off.
It looks like 50% are allocated to affordability. So if you add those as a group, 50% to affordability, 10, 20.
20 to sustainability and 30 to reliability.
30 is to environmental, and I guess the last 20 is to reliability. Just in terms
No,
of.
30.
30 to reliability.
20
Yeah.
50, 20, 30.
Okay.
to sustainability.
So interesting.
The other thing
Let's keep
that's,
rolling.
that we kind of brought up in our discussions and phone calls was, in their model, they assume that all market purchases are thermal products. And we've all heard kind of Mike do a bit of an analysis thinking that a certain percentage of that, because it's coming out of the Northwest where there's a lot of hydro and wind, and that really that market purchase does have quite a bit of renewable content. We have no way to know what that is, so.
And I-
Similarly, anything we send back to the market, we don't get credit as renewable.
Right. So if we've overbuilt solar and wind and we're doing market sales, we've lost that credit as being renewable.
The
So
place that gets tracked
it's just
is
interesting.
the renewable generation by 2030 and 2035. That's what's showing, right, that's just comparing how much renewable generation did Logan City produce during the year and how much power did we use during the year.
Correct. So you can think of it sort of a net zero target for Logan.
Yeah.
If you had a demand of 100 for the day, and let's call it 240, 10 each hour for all 24 hours. And if you would have produced, let's say 240 during your solar hours, right? And let's say you didn't produce anything in the others, or let's say you did produce it. The way we look at it is you consumed 240, you made 240 of renewable, so technically all your stuff is green. You can think of it like RECs. We have our own RECs that goes towards it. And then if you buy power or if you sell power, that's outside of it. So I think the essence that we understood is from the renewable generation content is we thought Logan City, whatever you consume, you want to make sure you at least make that equivalent amount that's renewable that you know it's bankable. And the only way you know to do that is if you build it yourself or you do a PPA so you know it's connected. And the grid stuff, even though it may have a renewable content, you don't know what's what.
Would it be true that if we were in California where they have a market tracking system that's more robust than our region, that we would be able to know what's going out and in as renewable and be able to sort of keep that on our ledger?
Are they that granular?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think you can do calculations off of it. Like they would have it that says, okay, well, noon, negative prices, it's all solar. So that makes it very easy. But they will have pie charts that would say on a given day or whatever, this is the generation mix, that's what it looked like for the day. So you could say, okay, well, if it's 50% renewable on there, I can do my math and say, I feel good that I bought 50% renewable. But technically it's not legal, right? There's nothing that they can say it really is that, other than your own math.
Do you want to flip to the next slide that has the raw numbers so we can scan that?
Are those 1 million tons of,
Yes.
Million metric tons.
and so there is only,
So that was the point Gazal made, was that we have contracts and PPAs with, we take or pay, right? We pay whether we take power or not. And so we're not going to not take that power. So it's difficult to move that very far.
And we didn't look on exactly when those contracts, and we just assumed that those were must run for this entire period.
No, they took that into
Okay.
consideration.
We have the templates for each.
So it's basically saying that any of these was having a hard time getting total emissions below 2,000 because of those must-run units. But with a lot of these portfolios that have the higher renewable targets, what you're doing is you're producing renewable onto the market and selling it during the day, and then using those thermal generations at other times. So that's what we said, on net, you're producing as much renewable as you use at 100%,
Right.
but not necessarily at the times that you're
Correct.
using it.
And where we have battery, we have our arbitrage. We can take our batteries and take that power and put it into the batteries such that at nighttime, when your peak comes and the power prices are higher, we will discharge those batteries. And I think it's in the report to kind of lower our cost. And depending on what scenario we're looking at, there are times that very early in the morning, power prices are really low. If you have the battery that's kind of empty, let's fill it up, and then we'll use that in the morning hours when the demand's picking up between 8 to 10 o'clock, but the solar hasn't really kicked on. So at that point, we'll discharge. So again, we're taking advantage of, we're getting the reliability part, plus we're getting some economic benefit, if you will, of the battery that we put in.
So we've just complicated Uchi's job by 100%. Because now she has to fill a battery as well as your house.
That was a question that came up, we're adding 20, in the third column, it's 75% renewable, but emissions only drop 5%. That's because we're not getting any emissions credit for anything we're sending to the market, and everything we pull from the market has no renewable content. So if we'd done a fifth scenario that said, let's minimize our emissions within the walls of Logan, we would have put in a lot more storage and to suck up that extra solar so that we can discharge it again and not have to buy on the market and sell at the market where we lose that sort of emissions credit. That's kind of what's happening.
And that would come at a cost too, right? Because you're willing more capacity, and these assets that we already have it, we paid for it. So you don't have to worry about the capital cost part of it. It's just variable O&M. So it would increase your overall portfolio cost, but yeah, directionally, again, it doesn't come for free, right? If you really want to make a big impact from a sustainability standpoint, it will cost you. For some people, $2 million is not that much. As a joke.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's always a lot.
So,
Especially when it's not my money.
if I'm reading that emissions comparison, we're saying about 50 million less tons of emissions in the first three, maybe between the first two and the third one, right?
We see the first three as more or less the same.
So, but 50 million, that's only about half of the emissions for a year.
50.
When you divide your total by 18 years.
Yeah, this is a total of 20 years though.
So 20 years or 18 years? 20.
20 years. It starts in 2023, not before, sorry. So it should start in 2023.
18 years.
Yes, between the 2024 and 2042.
So 18 years.
So it's about a half the emissions of 1 year if you went really aggressive with the renewables.
I think what you're saying is if you go with candidate portfolio 1, you can basically reduce that 2,500 down to 2044. And if you do divide it by 18 or 20 or whatever, like that's the delta that we're talking about.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that even if we went super aggressive with the renewables, we're only saving about half a year's worth of emissions spread out through 18 or 20 years.
Right. And the key reason is the must run. So.
But you are producing renewables that are being used other places that in theory on net offset this emission, but
you are doing good for the planet.
It's
or
just
the city
not
or whatever.
within-
It's just not reflected in that number.
not within the direct emissions from power generation controlled by Logan City.
Right.
So you can think of it the difference between, like if you had solar on your house, the difference of going net zero, which means over the year you produce as much solar as you use, versus going off grid, which means you're generating everything yourself.
Yeah. So how do we better keep track of that power that maybe we're not being able to account for, that we put back into the...
It'd have to be a kind of just a calculation that you do on what you produce. And then an educated guess on what you purchase.
So we could probably calculate what's our theoretical reductions outside the gates of Logan City and sort of apply a factor. But in some ways, we're sort of subsidizing other people's emissions reductions. As we dump our solar onto the market, they're going to turn their fossils down to a point. Is that sort of, so that there are emissions reductions happening, we're just not able to calculate them and take credit
Quantify
for
it with
them.
this model, yeah.
If there were a federal tracking system across the whole country that measured all inflows and outflows and this carbon, some kind of carbon trading system, we would start to get credit for those things we're selling back into the market, kind of like renewable energy credits.
Right. If you have a rec market, then you can keep track, because then it doesn't, like, megawatts can flow, but the rec certificate's flowing a different way. And it's just kind of, I think what you were talking about, Tyson, I think when you say net metering, it's basically saying I can go buy those recs and clean my, non-renewable power by buying this, so, which is kind of what we're doing here. But the rec market, like, we won't be able to create it ourselves, but yeah.
And those emissions numbers also, if you start looking past 2042, as some of the must-runs drop off, then you could probably start seeing bigger changes past then. It's just, this ends at 2042.
If we find stuff that can run at night, right? Right now, our only options at night are thermals.
Yeah, and we don't know what the model would have told us to do if we didn't have those must-runs, right?
Yeah, we didn't run it, but I mean, if I had to opine on it, I think what we would probably do is we would probably get a lot more wind build out, I would think, because especially for nighttime, we're running more of those fossil fuel plants at night. We would do that. We'd probably add a little bit of solar too, because those must runs are running during the day as well. So day stuff, you replace it with solar because it's cheaper. Night stuff, you'd probably replace it with wind. And then battery would be put in as needed. But again, all that stuff would add cost to the overall portfolio. And all those things have a higher per unit cost, if you will, than these must-run units that we have got.
Would it be fair to say the ideal would be some big cost breakthrough in geothermal, which can then replace our fossil generation one for one?
Right.
Or nuclear.
Or nuclear, yeah.
Yeah, or nuclear.
Yeah.
Is battery pretty much just the current technology battery that, or are we
So
talking?
there's different battery technologies that we looked at. Did we look at the 4 hours and 8 hours in there? Okay.
We have the 2
Yeah,
hours,
so
5
there's
hours, and
4 and 8 hours is what we put in, which is kind of more common today.
There's lots of
Yeah.
different, I mean, lithium ion's the most common and probably cheapest.
Is Utah exploring any of like the mechanical or gravity-driven types of storage?
We aren't, we don't, like, for example, Logan City has no way to do a pump storage anywhere. Have the roads.
So nowhere in Utah that's being explored.
No, I know some entities are using it, but they have really unique geography. And in fact, we had some presentations on it at that conference we did in Midway a couple of months ago.
The limiting factor for us is some of these technologies that you're talking about tend to be larger. Like we talked about SMR, nuclear, small modular reactors. Yeah, they're renewable, but they're usually bigger. Those nuclear reactors are 600 megawatts. Our power consumption is nowhere near there.
Right.
Mark would have to do a lot of advocacy with you. It's like, everybody let's hop on board. But nuclear is starting to see some traction.
Valley.
But I think we don't have the scale to entertain those kind of technologies. But US, collectively, there's potential.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about it with geothermal too, that in your model, some of the assumptions on the cost and scale of geothermal are the reasons it didn't pick geothermal. But if you can get a PPA with the bigger group, that could change the cost.
Right.
That it might make more sense, but the model didn't pick it because
Right.
financially.
Right now, geothermal is expensive. So,
Yeah.
but I think with scale, everything should get cheaper because you can, spread that cost, even fixed costs and things like that. So, but with like we said, like 70 megawatts of sort of average demand and 100 as peak or 100 and change today, increasing. It's not, and plus you have existing assets, so that limits how much you can play with. But with batteries, solar, wind, these are smaller chunks that we can kind of install and spread it out over time. Because the other thing that we, kind of didn't really talk much about is, we talked about the NPV, but it also matters, when are you putting those assets? Because we brought it to 2023, so we had to discount it back to 2023, right? So that third portfolio is basically hitting the gas pedal and we're building more things quicker. So if you do an NPV of all that cost and bringing it forward, it's going to be much higher. versus if you were building something in the year 2042, if you discount it back, it probably wouldn't have as much of an impact versus if you do something in 5 or 10 years from now. So there's that factor in. But again, the key thing I think is it's a living document, right? Assumptions change, and it should be looked at every so often to see what technological innovations and things like that are out there. How should we pivot after the next 5 years, right? So, I mean, don't wait 5 years, I would say, but whatever Mark and company do in the next 5 years, then the following 5 years, you can make course correction. If the demand has gone up significantly due to economic activity in the area and things like that, or technological innovation, we can certainly alter this, and then you would get a different look. And you just keep doing that kind of out forward, and that's what other utilities do. You don't do it once and you stop. There's always better solutions. So this was sort of our conclusion, right, in terms of which one wins, if you will. And so we did it based on that step 1 and step 2. That's the report card that we kind of set in the beginning. Then we do the analysis and figure out, okay, well, which one ended up being the best? And this one, in this case, it was reference portfolio. But it is close, like you guys said. Like 0.1 is not that big of a difference. But when we do this for other utilities, we don't find something where, you don't see 1, 2, 3, 4. Like it's not that plain cut. Usually you'll get 1 or 2 or whatever. They will be kind of pretty neck and neck. And then it ultimately comes down to kind of your point of view and where you want to take it. And then obviously the other one is CapEx, right? It's going to cost. And what does that look like? And what can you guys do in terms of rates and things like that? And go with that decision.
So Mark, as moving forward from this roadmap, would you say that we would be able to reference some of this as you present options and plans to us for the future?
Yeah, I mean, as we consider, we get proposals, companies will come to UAMPS and say, hey, I got a solar farm or whatever. They come and they present that. We decide, well, do we want to participate in this project, or do we want to just participate a little bit? Do we want to participate a lot? And certainly this can weigh, what projects we're looking at.
And in the report, it shows a lot of data. So it makes assumptions based on the cost of solar, right? And so we could look at that and say, hey, that fits in. Right. It's around the same cost, or, oh, that's way more. Wow, look at this. This is way less than what the projection. Maybe we should definitely get in on that deal.
Okay.
And it gives us some goals for renewables in the next decade, what we want to shoot for.
Yeah, I think that, the RESAP board has been very careful to help us create those targets. Yeah. But I would hope that this exercise would help us refine those targets so that we're more able to choose A over B. And, that Mark can come and say, based on this, we've chosen A over B.
Yeah.
And we can relate back to this and say, okay, that helps to meet our goal for whatever reference portfolio we're choosing.
It's our general plan for energy.
So as we look in, like with the new generation that we're planning for Logan, does that move us backward in our goal for more renewables by 2030, or how are we trying to offset that?
It basically says that if we don't count renewable content in market purchases, that we need to add 40 more megawatts of solar to hit our goal. But again, we've done both ways. Some of the past reports Mike's produced, we've tried to estimate some of those market purchase renewable content. So that's probably something that we need to refine as RESAP is, are we counting those market purchases or are we not when we talk about a renewable goal?
So it's difficult, right? We're looking at rate increases for the next couple of 3 years to offset power costs, but I'll just throw one example out there. maybe 2. Geothermal, we had a letter of intent signed with Circ Energy, which is a geothermal company. And it was around $80 a megawatt, which is very expensive, but we felt like it's renewable, it's base load, maybe it's worth a little more. So we marched down that road. Pretty soon Circ Energy stopped responding to UAMPS, and they got a new board of directors somewhere in the process. They have looked at their numbers, and they can make a lot more money by selling it to California, so they've kind of given us the stiff shoulder, so to speak. So we don't even have the option to look at that anymore. They just took it away because they know they can make a lot more money.
So a project like that, to sell it to California, they need a whole lot of transmission. And
They do, but they do.
so how do they bypass our
California does
hurdles?
not care. They have very deep power pockets. Because they're mandated by law, so if their power costs are 3-4 times what we are in this valley, that's what it is. So they'll buy it.
So help me understand though, we've heard before that when there is a new project that wants to come online, there's a wait period of, I don't know how many years, for the transmission to
4 to 5 years.
to take on it. So how does California bypass the wait or they?
No, so
And Mark, we should probably have had you come up to this other mic so people online can hear you better. Maybe just switch to one of those mics. Sorry, I didn't do
Nope.
it sooner.
Didn't think about it.
So our transmission provider is Rocky Mountain Power. California is going to have to pay over Rocky Mountain Power as well as into their own system, which depending on the entity, it might just be into their municipality or whatever it is. Circ Energy is the one that is responsible for doing those transmission study with the transmission company, which will be Rocky Mountain Power essentially. And they won't let go of that queue, right? They've been in that lineup for 3 or 4 years. Their amount they're going to produce remains the same. It's just, somebody else is going to buy it. It's going to go on the same wires, but just going to go different directions. So
And we're going to get more money.
they're going to get more money. I mean, they price us out, right? We can't, at least not yet. Maybe someday we'll be paying the same power rates as California, but I hope not.
So maybe I'm kicking, what's the expression in
Kicking the
English?
can.
Not kicking the can, but if a project was hugging the queue for 3 to 4 or 5 years to come online, somebody comes and takes that supply, now we have to wait another 4 to 5 years for another project to become viable. So does Rocky Mountain not care, or it's just not able to?
They're still making their money.
Yeah.
They don't care.
They're
They don't
just
care.
the transmission, they're just the transmission.
So they're not just constrained by, I mean, a big part of this wait is we don't have enough transmission in the system to supply renewables, right? We have enough if we were going to do coal and natural gas, because those are large-sized plants that have a constant capacity factor. But when you talk about renewables, we're kicking on solar here, we're kicking on solar here, we're wind here, now our transmission is really inadequate. And that's why Rocky Mountain Power is so backed up, because they have to do these load studies on their system to see if they can handle it where it's coming online. To your point, the other thing that compounds this problem is everybody knows this takes a long time, and so they jump in the queue, file their applications, and I would say a very large percentage of those projects never happen, but they plugged up the queue for 3 or 4 years, and then it gets to their turn like, oh, no, we can't
We're not gonna do
make it work, so we're out. When you could have had another viable project online years earlier. And that's a problem that the federal government is trying to deal with. They don't deal with anything.
And that also creates a little bit more complexity. As I was telling you earlier,
Exactly.
we've got another project. I'll just leave it like that. But if you look at Idaho, as an example, right? State just north of us, not that far away. If you look at their connection queue, I think our transmission person told me 12,000 megawatts in the connection queue. So now if Mark were to go in there, let's just say we're in Idaho, Mark were to go and say, I want to put 40 megawatts in, 12,040, you're behind. It's going to take you years to kind of get to that. But what also makes this part a little bit difficult is when we do this analysis, we sort of assume that you can put it in, supply demand. But when you look at transmission, what they look at is constraints. So let's say the first 1,000 megawatts go through, there's enough wires, it can get out, no problem. The next 1,000, I'm just bucketing it, is going to require major transmission upgrades. Somebody's going to have to pay for it. And sometimes these power companies, the developers are going to have to pay for that, or maybe Idaho Power or whatever, the utility can do it themselves, but they don't have the manpower. So it could work out where you go front the cash, you go do it, they'll pay you back later just so your power goes. So each time you move down the queue, something's going to break and more capital is going to be required to make that transmission work. And so it makes that problem a little bit more challenging. And this is not something that's new. All over the US, if you look at it with the mandates and things like that are in there, the queues are huge everywhere. And I think reality is these utility companies, they're just not able to do these interconnect studies that much. That's why like in some of the things that Siemens PTI that we do for developers is we will actually do that analysis for them to figure out, okay, what is the sweet spot? Then go ahead and put in your application. So otherwise you're putting things in that you don't know whether you'll be able to materialize or not, or there might be a lot more costs associated with it. So this is the kind of additional stuff that makes things more complex.
Transmission's there's so many, it needs reform, basically.
It does.
And you could do things like you triple or quadruple the amount you have to put down to apply to get in the queue. But then developers are going to say, well, that's penalizing us, and it's going to favor huge companies. If there's this balance between letting projects get in the queue, but creating sort of thresholds for them to be actual real projects that aren't sort of monkeying around and sort of hoping that they'll get their project done. It's well beyond us. It's well beyond Utah even.
And it's interesting, so I sit on the board of directors for Intermountain Power Agency, IPP down in Delta. And so they've gone from an 1,800 megawatt coal plant, they're moving to a 900 megawatt natural gas plant. So they have said, because they own the transmission between Delta and California, it's okay, we got a lot of extra capacity. You wouldn't believe the number of applicants that have come in, and they'll pay tens of thousands of dollars to be considered. And people just can't find transmission. And if it's there, they're going for it.
Yeah.
And this is the new world of distributed generation that we've got, because instead of having one nuclear plant that's supplying it all, now we've got stuff all over the place. How is it going to flow? That's going to require a lot of studies, and that's what's backing it all up.
Thank you and good night.
Yeah. Yeah, do we have any other questions while we have their attention, or are we good?
No, I'm about done.
Yeah. We just need our own plant.
We're doing 20 megawatts of natural gas, basically, so we can utilize more of these renewable options. Again, it's only running when we need it, but without that behind the meter to avoid the transmission challenges, we couldn't keep increasing the renewables at the rate we are. So that's your trade-off. And there is some volatility with the price of natural gas, but at least we control, when we run it, and we can utilize it to balance as much renewable capacity as we can.
Interestingly enough, we don't avoid the transmission costs, but we avoid that queue.
Right.
We still have to pay for what we put on, even though we're behind the meter.
That's how bad they are.
Well, the idea is that if you guys drop off, then we as Rocky Mountain Power have to supply you, so you've got to pay the transmission. We kind of do the same thing to USU, so.
But that's a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a big bit.
Okay. If there are no more questions, Anuj, Giselle, thank you.
Thank you
so much. We appreciate your information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just want to also say thank you to the RESAP board. They were very helpful through the whole study. In addition to Mark, UC, and everybody in Mark's shop. So I just want to say thanks
Yeah.
for their input and comments.
Hopefully we can take this information and use it wisely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Super interesting.
Never simple.